It's a fairly one-sided quorum.
Welcome to the first Risk and Assurance meeting for the year. Bruce is online, and any members of the public online. We do have a quorum.
We do.
With 5. And Leslie's here, so. Firstly, I'd like to confirm the agenda and note that the item 8 on governance risk will sit on the table at the moment and be brought back to the next meeting after some further work. Given that one change, could I ask for someone please to move the agenda? Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Tom. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Abstain? Carried. Thank you very much. Minutes of the meeting held on 21 November 2023 are in front of you. Are there any misstatements or corrections anyone wishes to note? No. Otherwise, I'll move those minutes. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Tom. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Sorry. I'll go back. Note apologies. I have apologies from Mayor Clark and Councillor Pottinger. Were there any other apologies?
Is Councillor Kett a member of this committee?
I'll move those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Leslie. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right. The annual report for 2023. Welcome, Chris, and welcome, Jenna, online.
Morning.
Morning, Ross.
Morning.
And Stephanie.
Stephanie, you're going. Welcome, Steph, to your first RNA meeting. Promise we'll be gentle on you, just like we were at your previous role. Thank you for the paper, Stephanie and or Patricia. Are there anything you wish to draw our attention to first?
No, I don't think so. I think it's, fairly straightforward. Just pull the mic up, so as Bruce won't hear you. No, it was fairly straightforward from my side of things.
Thank you, very comprehensive. Patricia, anything you want to add?
I think probably, given that I've got the history of the last couple, this was a very different audit, and we said that when we adopted it, and it can be seen in the management report. We acknowledge that there's still work on, and there will often be work-ons right through, and we are putting together a program. We've got more time than what we did after the 22 ones, which we were just approving at this time of the year, to actually get some of these improvements put in place before we do the June 24 audit later in the year. So I don't think, Chris, is there anything that you want to add in relation to that?
I'll be guided by the committee. I mean, we spoke to a update letter in November, which basically covered the major salient points in the report. If I'm happy to go through that again, or we can sort of head to questions. I'm easy.
I don't think it's necessary to go through again. I just want to thank you for the approach, refreshing approach, and the way it was conducted this year, far more smoothly for both sides. Councillors.
Thanks, Ross. I'd also like to acknowledge, the work of Patricia and her team. I think, it's good to say that it is a good process, and we should sort of reflect and acknowledge that too.
Grant.
Yeah, a few. Firstly, reinforce Chris's comments to the team, Patricia and her team. I think they've done a great job of engaging well with Chris and the team, and equally Chris's team has done a great job engaging with them, so I want to acknowledge that. A couple of 3 things, just on page 19 of board books, or 4 of Chris's report, just want to understand, it's been referenced a little bit about the public benefit related to ICL, and my understanding, and I could be wrong, was that, you know, that's something that's going to be measured going forward in terms of audit. So the non-financial benefit of some investments that councils make, how would that show up in an audit report? I'm not expecting to see it perhaps in this one, but in future reports, how would that, a public benefit of an investment like this council's done with ICL and other councils will do, how would that show up in an audit report? How would they record what's the public benefit in an audit? Because I think it's important for our public to understand.
I'll probably take it at how we're going to show it. We're going to show it as a qualitative. It's other than economic gain, in which we've already seen, and council, I'm pretty sure, have seen that NZIER report on the economic benefit of the development. It'll be on qualitative measures, the number of people that we have in the CBD, and those sorts of aspects. It's really public benefit, and I think Chris will jump in here and add to it. Public benefit's really hard to measure, and it's just how people feel in very thing. I think, Chris, have you got anything more to add there?
I think it's probably worth contrasting some of the comments into the report and what we're talking about here as well. I think a lot of the comments in the report are referring to the mixed commercial and public objectives of ICL and some of the accounting implications that can arise from that. I think the conversation we're having here is very much around you know, what is the service providing, and I think you're right there, Patricia, that reflects in terms of what you would have in a performance framework and how you would report against that and what's meaningful in measuring that. So I think it's a place to possibly reflect on a group performance framework and how you measure that piece, but definitely a qualitative judgment.
And for the assurance of the public and also us as councillors, so then, Chris, would you put a comment to say, well, look, we've reviewed what the council tried to establish through that particular investment and we agree that that has been achieved. So then there's a qualitative assessment by yourselves to say it has been achieved or it hasn't. So how would we independently get a view that it has or hasn't been achieved, some of those qualitative outputs?
Yeah, so I think it's about setting up the framework, reporting against that framework in terms of those aspects of the qualitative pieces you want to see. And then my opinion, my broader opinion would cover the service performance information, providing that independent assurance within the annual report.
Yeah, okay. And then just the second one, and it's probably to Michael, I think, reading through the sort of report, there's a number of things, you know, necessary or amber around our payment system or how we manage. See, there's one comment around how we invoice ourselves and those sorts of things, and to me it comes up to a global view of, you know, our payment system. You know, where are we at with getting a really good, robust system that enables us to have confidence that we are sort of handling, you know, payments and money and all that sort of good stuff?
Through yourself, Chair, I can answer that one. I'll go into that in more depth on my risk risk verbal update later in the meeting. But in relation to the question, we've got a plan in place in relation to trying to improve in that space. But having said that, we do take all of these recommendations through into our continuous improvement program. So when things are identified via our internal audit, we put them into our list and we actually work through each one individually. A lot of the items that you see in the management report here are identifying things which have already been or are being worked on currently to amend. That doesn't completely answer your question, which I'll be answering more in depth in the internal update from the CE later in the meeting.
So further question. So this time next year when we're reviewing the audit and Chris's teams come through, we wouldn't see any of these concerns raised, or we would see less? Where would?
Through yourself, Chair, I would go with the latter, which is you will see less, not none. And I hate to say that to audit, but it's a big program of work to actually improve on some of these items. They're not small items.
No.
So it will be, you will see less. We have an active program to try and improve all of them. It will take us some time.
Yeah, I mean, it's important because it's public money, right? And so we need absolute robustness around it. And as soon as we get to none, the better, in my view.
Thanks. Bruce.
Yeah, g'day, folk, and my apologies, Ross, that I've had to ask you to chair. It's probably a good sign that you can't get a flight for love nor money to Invercargill. It's been a busy town for the last 2 or 3 weeks, which has been tremendous. Look, a couple of questions from me, please, Ross, if that's okay. And Grant, pretty closely parallel you. Look, firstly, as chair, can I just say thank you to Chris and Jenna and Patricia that it has given rise to that great statement that things have gone much better this year. I'll always be keen to know what we can do better, and I think there's some hint there in your paper, Chris and Jenna, which is helpful. And Patricia, I assume somewhere there will be, if you haven't already, a level of debrief so that some improvements, if as they seem to be possible, can be made. So, but I would want to take that away from the overall gratitude that I'm hearing from the committee that things have gone well. And most importantly, Chris, I feel that as an audit service, you have approached some quite difficult issues, particularly around ICL in terms of the accounting treatment, etc. Well, so I'm deeply appreciative of that. Thank you. There is just a couple of questions. Minor. 14. Did our property valuation go up to $390,000 million in the course of the last revaluation process? It's a cheap shot, and I won't go any further on that one. You can tell me whether that's the case or not. Grant, I agree. Actually, I think the paper is really important in terms of setting out clearly what have been the valuation movements and why around ICL, both our investment at group level and individual level, and also the valuation of the loans. And I think this is actually quite an important record for us to remember. And I appreciate the comments you've made, Grant, about recording what are the benefits. Because, of course, the accounting implications of there being a public benefit objective to our investment clearly reflects in the accounting valuations. And I think that's an important point, Patricia and Michael, that we should consider going forward, is actually how that is measured and reported. And I hear your point, Grant, potentially how that's got a level of independent assurance. One thing that I find really important is on page 27, Chris's and Jenna's view on our control environment and internal controls. And again, I think you've given us a pass mark here, Chris, and I'm appreciative of that, with some questions around internal controls. And I'm probably, again, a bit like you, Grant, interested in actually how we move some of those. One of them in particular, well, there's two of them in particular I want to raise questions on, Chris. One is, or Patricia, you may even have a comment first. The first is on page 29 of our, no, 44, I think it's 44 of our agenda. Sorry, I've been using, I think, your report number, Chris, page 44, I think, of our agenda, which is the payroll segregation of duties. Probably by number one of our bigger spends, and your expression of concern, Chris, around a lack of segregation of duties. Now, Patricia, in effect, you've said partly it's to do with size, but actually, if I read your response or the organisation's response correctly, you're saying there's nothing that can be done about this, or you're saying the control we actually have in place is adequate, and in effect, if I can put it this way, you're rejecting Chris's recommendations. So I just wonder if you could, both of you could help me here as to, from a committee perspective, do we have a real issue now?
I think I'll start there, Bruce, and I'll take this one for Stephanie. What we're saying is that we have put in some controls ourselves by rotating the team around the different components of the payroll function, so that no one only ever does one component. So that, say they do pulls for a while and then they'll do something else. So they're checking each other's work. So from that perspective, that's how we've seen the control. We are mindful that we are also considering changing our payroll processes and a payroll software at the moment, which will also impact this, and we will be able to get, we will be looking to get some greater level of control. It's how we design those controls within having such a small team without having to blow out the team to provide that extra assurance. Chris, have you got anything else to add there?
Yeah, I suppose the commentary in the report's talking about effectively preventative control, Bruce, saying there should be limited access. And I suppose the limited access and the rotation, that's kind of one or the other. But that's where I'm sort of coming from in respect to that point.
So there is no immediate, given our system and more importantly the size of our payroll function, there's no immediate answer to your concern that we are running risks in the functioning of our payroll section, short of either a new system and or dedicated preparers and reviewers or checkers. In other words, you're not happy with the rotational nature of what we are doing is inadequate in your view.
Yep, I think there should be preventative controls, which comes back to the system points. But again, there's obviously an investment there in terms of staff quotient.
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. So look, Michael, again, I think this is Grant, you've picked up on the payment system. I'm picking up here on the payroll system. In effect, we've got a position here where not that we are necessarily, I don't think, Patricia, you are necessarily disagreeing with Chris, but we've got a fundamental challenge of control, preventative, around our around one of our big payment areas. So I just would like to suggest that this needs a bigger response, perhaps a pathway to actually are there any credible ways we as an organisation can address the risk? The other question then on page 51, Chris, probably almost direct to you, is actually how do we move some of these recommendations? And the one that interested me in particular, probably because we're in the process of LTP planning, as indeed the rest of the sector is, and this seems a very sector-wide challenge, is the asset condition in the IPS database. Okay, which is to include information on condition of the asset. And you've said the issue remains open. I have a response from management, which is credible, but I don't know whether this response, in your eyes, as an independent expert, is adequate or not. What percentage coverage do we need to have, for instance, and is it as simple as that we have information that is adequate?
I'm going to sit on the fence there, Bruce. I don't think there's a perfect answer to what percentage you should have, and I mean that's a summarised recommendation that we are looking at there. I would like to look at the context of that from the 22 report. I'll come back to you more fully.
Look, could you do that? And I mean, I would appreciate a response out of the organisation as well. Look, this is sort of semi around a comment I've always heard from within the sector. We need more. We always need better information, but it seems like we never get to a position where we either are prepared to say we have enough, stop, or just maintain what we've got versus the continuing line of investment. I'm not saying that you, Chris, are the final arbiter of that. In fact, I think first and foremost it's on the organisation. That's why I'd be interested, Michael, in an organisational response again, a bit like the payroll, what's the pathway to getting the solution? Otherwise, I think you're in my and Grant's camp. We're going to still have this here next year and the year after and the year after. So I would be keen when there are some of these ones where the issue is still open. How do we nail it? Hey, thanks. That's quite a lot of questions there, Ross. Thank you that you've given me the chance. So I want to leave it that again, Chris, many thanks to you and Jenna for a much better audit and what I consider an audit service. So thank you.
So I'll just come to Michael first for response, then Tom, then Leslie.
Thank you through yourself, Chair, and thank you there, Bruce, online. I do actually have two answers for you in relation to the payroll and the asset one. The payroll system itself is one of our first projects that we have initiated as part of the internal program. It is underway, that particular work program, and the controls are very much part of the work that's associated with that. We have actually just agreed that we needed to focus on that even more, so we've actually extended the time frame slightly so we can actually get some more focus in that area, so the team are working on that right now. In relation to the asset information, I think if you look at what we've put into the consultation document for the long-term plan, we're actually focusing on trying to get better data to actually inform our asset information through the first couple of years of the long-term plan, and that some of that is about putting even cameras down our pipes, so we really do understand the conditions of those pipes. So that's pretty important in relation to what's come up from the audit as well, and we also have in our enhancement program looking at asset modelling as well as part of that. I have to say we need the data first before we can put the system in for that. So that's not in the first year of that program, but we will be looking at that where we put that into the next phase. So it's not the first phase of that. I just want to update you on those two.
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Michael, and I appreciate that. So again, I think Ross, if I could argue, I think these are two key areas that as a committee we should be aware of, because I've mentioned, for instance, asset information in relationship to planning, but of course it's also relevant to the ongoing evaluation of our asset systems. So I would be interested to see where it gets to. Thanks for that, Michael. Appreciate the response.
Thank you, Tom.
So my questions are on page 18 of diligent, or page 3 of the report, and it's the two, except for matters, the two dot point matters. They may have been covered before, but I would just like to seek a little bit additional clarification on the first one, which is of course to do with the asset valuations and the way it was treated in 2021, which is kind of rolled forward and resulted in qualified opinions for the last two audits. Am I right in thinking that this is the last year when that will apply?
You're right.
Why?
Because the closing balance from 2021 in reserves was the opening balance and the comparatives, so that number was still there, and it was how much is the movement, is the how I in a simple manner look at it. So we know that the assets moved, but we don't know in which year, but because that gives an opening balance of the asset revaluation reserve for that. So for this year, when we moved the comparative numbers, so the 23 numbers over, that's already, it doesn't matter anymore.
So it will not feature this year. So the second dot point about traffic count, is it a practical possibility for us to satisfy that requirement, or are we again, every year going to have this now that somebody's noticed it?
It's my understanding, and they've actually just completed some internal reviews on this, that this will be able to be fixed going forward. It was simply that the raw data that supported that was corrupted when we went back to check it.
Okay, thank you. Don't like qualified opinions, do we?
None of us do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just getting back to the payroll issue, and I agree with Bruce, you can always improve payroll processes and controls, but I did just want to mention that there's a couple of checks and balances in there now that I think we should probably highlight. and one of them is that a different staff member reviews the work to the one that performs the task, and I think that's really important that it's highlighted. And the other one is the internal audit when it comes to checking the master file changes. So I just thought when we're talking about payroll and what's there at the moment, there are checks and balances there, and while I acknowledge improvements can come, just wanted to say that the fact those checks and balances are there did give me some comfort about the current processing.
Noted. Thanks, Leslie. Grant.
Yeah, just one, and it's to make our country better, Bruce and Chris. You know, to your comment, Bruce, around infrastructure, you know, I would expect that Audit New Zealand would go to Infrastructure New Zealand and say, look, we need to be better at this about helping councils who are making really important decisions for our future in terms of how they make those decisions, information collection, because we could do what, you know, in Invercargill, and then someone else could do it, and replication is a waste. So, you know, and I'm serious, you know, Audit New Zealand needs to be talking to Infrastructure New Zealand about how we get better at this sort of thing, because we can see the issue because we haven't been good at it. Technology is a wonderful thing, and I think there's you know, it's way outside my pay grade, but, you know, there must be some clever minds in our universities and across New Zealand that can actually solve this problem for us on a global perspective, and then we can capture that technology and information to get better and get more effective spend in infrastructure, because otherwise we're going to die in a ditch. So if you two gentlemen could fix that and come back to me, that'd be fantastic.
Look, I agree with you actually, Grant, and at one level. I think there's also the reality that we have to do some of our own homework.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I think the problem that I'm struggling with here, and this is not a critique, by the way, of Invercargill itself, Grant, is that many engineers and many local authorities say to me, "Oh, we need more data," and I've been saying, "But you've been aware of that for the last 25 years. What's the problem?" I agree with you. There must be, well, I know there are ways and systems of doing it. It seems to be a question of dedication and ability to devote some resource to it. So I take the point, a very good point, and I'm sure Chris is hearing that. I'll let Chris speak for himself, but the Auditor General should be well aware of that, I hope.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Grant. I completely agree too. Probably more of a place for the broader office, the office rather than ourselves as an audit provider. I think it needs to cover all local authorities, and looking at that, certainly something we can feed back.
Thanks.
Just then one final question from me, in note 2023's historic. So it's just around the planning and resource and everything online for audit for 2024 of both LTP and the annual report. And I'd ask both Patricia firstly and Chris just to comment to give us some assurance on that program.
So the LTP audit is, I think we'd probably call it well advanced. As councillors are aware, we took the option of not having a consultation document audited this year, though the team have been in and have started the audit of the underlying document so that they can give their opinion on the final document. So in relation to that, we, and I'll be fair here, I'll say in relation to the annual report, we haven't sort of started discussing the audit of that, knowing that at the moment the priority is the long-term plan audit. Though we are seeing that relationship build as we're working through the LTP as well. It's the same, often the same teams that we're doing. Chris, do you want to add something? Because I know we are sitting without, just so everyone's aware, without an engagement letter for the LTP audit yet, as we were waiting for the Water Repeal Act to come into force so that could be issued. So you will start seeing a flurry of documents coming through in relation to that. Chris?
So I suppose in terms of the engagement letter, we got the all clear following the Royal Assent on Friday to release that. So hopefully we should get that to you later this week in terms of the engagement letter for the LTP. I think in terms of what's in there, we had an update letter again in November, which outlined the areas of focus there. So you should see those reflected alongside the audit fee. This week, Michael will have also received a letter from the Office of the Auditor General, which talked around the fee strategy, which talks about a long-term move to a more sustainable fee, but a clear awareness of the current economic pressures and an uncertain environment, and holding that to more of an inflation-based figure over the last 3 years in the interim. So I think it's about 21% for those councils who do not get their CD audited. So that is coming. In terms of the audit plan and the test audit for 2024, I think there's a natural point to be kicking that off following completion of the work on the information that's underlying the LTP, which is very shortly, Patricia. So, yes.
Right. Thank you. If I could move to the motions, I'm not sure we need point 3, but whoever put it in, I guess.
Ross, quite
Could
right.
I ask someone to please move the Audit New Zealand Management?
I'll move.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ria. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jenna. And thank you, Stephanie.
Chris, thanks, Jenna.
Thank you.
Peter, you're up.
Morning, Mr. Chair.
Morning.
Councillors. I'd just like to call your attention to page 70 of your agenda, specifically table 1 and the information management Lagoima improvement area. While this has a number of actions outstanding, specifically 10 high actions, these relate to reviewing Council's Lagoima policy, re-promulgating that, and making staff familiar with their roles and responsibilities. This has taken a little bit longer than we had hoped. And secondly, a number of the high actions also relate to the automated workflow we have for Lagoima, and ensuring that the correct people are notified when a Lagoima workflow is activated, and that we actually have an escalation process in place for when they aren't completed in a timely manner, so that the respective group managers are informed if the Lagoimas aren't completed within a timely manner.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions? Tom?
My question is about whether we have the capacity and the policies and the motivation to completely satisfy Lagoima. Are we simply talking about the fact that it's not done as elegantly as it might be because of the systems, but is it still being done in accordance with that law?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Don't know where governance manager might want to speak on that.
From what was highlighted as the issues outstanding, it's more the internal education piece. A number of changes that have occurred as part of these improvements was really a bit more of a centralisation of the process. So I suppose what you could take comfort in is that the people who are actually dealing with the Lagoima responses understand their roles and responsibilities, but we haven't updated the policy and promulgated that to the organisation more broadly. But we're not expecting the majority of the organisation to deal with these requests. When they come in, there's a certain group and process for it to follow, and those people know what they're doing, but the improvements more broadly haven't gone out to the organisation.
Sorry, can I just, I mean, it's a kind of yes/no answer, really, Andrew. Are we satisfying the requirements of Lagoima at the moment?
I would have thought yes is a short answer. We can bring up the actual data,
yes.
but
Under the Act.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good question.
Bruce?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Thank you, Peter, for your report, and just an overall comment. Very comfortable with the range of audits you're doing now. That's tremendous, and I'm appreciative. I was interested in terms of the external reviews we'll have over environmental health services and the Building Control Authority later in the year. 2 questions. One, I presume the EHS one is done by IANZ as well. I just want to know who the reviewer is. The fact that you're preparing for it is tremendous. Is there anything out of the ordinary, though, that we are perhaps worried about, concerned about, or trying to deal with before they come in the door?
Environmental health is getting audited by JASANZ. next month, and we have no concerns so far with what's happening with that audit. With regarding the building services team, the BC Building Control Authority, in the southern region, there's a southern cluster group of the building control authorities, and we've been taking note of the themes that have been coming through from previous audits within the area. And these themes have been passed through to the manager and the team leader to ensure that they can see what's being focused on at this audit. So we believe we're on track for our audit in July this year.
Did you have a role, Peter, in seeing that those themes are addressed by the BCA before the audit?
Yes, our internal auditors normally focusing on those as they're auditing each regulation month by month.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you for that, Ross.
No further questions. Someone please move Peter's report. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Leslie. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Peter. Welcome, Andrew. Again, any commentary first?
Sorry.
Any commentary first alongside your paper before?
I think it's just really trying to pick up some of the processes that are identified in here and following on from the internal audit, that diagram that's on page 76 of board books around the perform. And it's just, this paper is really sort of reflecting and showing how we're continuing to develop and increase the risk maturity around the organisation. So again, we're going through the long-term plan, we're looking at those risks that might come out of the long-term plan, reviewing our risks. And you can see in this that ELT are really trying to look at our risks in that more broader context. So you'll see the ones that have been added in there and that Michael will talk to in a bit more detail later really go to the risks around the organisation itself being able to deliver the services that we're looking for. And that's across the three spheres, obviously from an improvement around our capability and also our financial resilience. And so it's just showing, I suppose, the increased maturity. We're picking up those things, we're starting to identify those risks, but also starting to emphasise that perform function. And really that's the questions that you're asking around the audit process. Okay, when we identify these things, when we identify where we're not performing the way we would like, are we fixing it? How long are we taking to fix it? What processes are we putting in place to improve those things so that our performance overall is better? And I think that's a bit of a theme that's starting to come through and that we're trying to develop through the organisation more generally. The other point is just a note there, obviously, around the risk that we identified in relation to the Youth Council and just the working with children. So it's just a heads up really to the councillors, which we've given previously in this committee around that policy and those changes that we're making in that space as well.
Thank you. Comments? Questions?
I do have a question, if I can find it again. Andrew, if I go to page 79 of board books and I look at risk number 192, which is the lower of the two that are on that page, councillor and executive governance may not be adequate. I've got a question or comment, but I mean, I think it's not just a matter of wordsmithing. I think there's a fundamental understanding that I think we need to debate or get right. So it says, if ICC's councillors and executive do not have the necessary governance skills and experience or have conflicting priorities, they may make decisions that are not in the best interest of the council. Now, my understanding is that we're elected to make decisions in the best interest of the community, not of the council. And there is a distinction between those two things. So I mean, if it's just a wordsmithing matter and, you know, we replace the word, but is it more than that? Because there is you understand the distinction I'm making?
Oh, there is, and it comes up, and we're not dealing with it fully, but I think you're right. And sometimes there might be an absolute distinction, and that's sort of highlighted in one of those risks around the financial resilience of the council. Because you might find that the interests of the community and the interests of council at some points might be in conflict. Whether they should be or whether or not you really can separate them. But to take your point, I think there is a scenario where you might find those interests in conflict. And And it was interesting when AL2 were discussing this. I mean, if you think about council, not as council, if you think it as an organisation, if it was a business, then there's a point where the business needs money to survive, and yet your community in this context might not necessarily have the willingness or the capacity to pay. And so that's where potentially you will get this tension around what council, as in the entity, says it needs in what it thinks is in the best interest of serving the community, but the community as the individual, the ratepayer in this case, might think, well, that's not in my interest. So and the councillors, in reflecting that, might say, we don't think that that's what's in the interest of the community. So I take your point. There is
and sorry, what I think. I think the issue through you, Chair, is that I've lost the wording now, but it talks about councillors and the executive. And the reality is that by mixing those two together, I think it creates confusion. There probably should be separate.
You could have separate risks.
And the reason I say that is because I think the executive kind of owes its fiduciary duty to the council, but I think elected members owe their fiduciary duty to the community. And they are intended to be different. So, I mean, it's like yes, minister. Almost that kind of discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you could have separate, effectively, governance risks for each of them, but still also note that at some stage there might be a different risk, which is really around the conflict. Yeah. If I hear you correctly,
I'm look. I don't want to keep going with that, but I'm just making the point that the duty of councillors is to the community. It's not a reality council. We need to fit in, but fundamental fiduciary duty, I think, is to the community. In my view, I mean, it's happy to debate it, but I mean that's my view. And I think if you leave it like that in the risk register, then I think it would be open to misinterpretation later. We say, hey, look, a councillor has acted, or council has acted in a way which is not in the best interest of council. And I think councillors can reply, yeah, but it's in the best interest of the community. So I would rather see that the words changed or two separate.
Yeah, I'm happy to bring that back and have a look at it and see how we do that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Grant.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and I'll just endorse Tom's comment there and question. I think that change needs to be made. So my question's probably, and it's relating to your diagram on page 76 of board books, and I'm interested in why now. And my question is, well, what have we been doing previously? Why has it all of a sudden become this is what we're doing? My expectation would have been this would have been happening. So I'm interested to understand, why has this now become vogue or sexy? Has it not been previously, or have we been remiss in our duties, or what? Where are we at?
I wouldn't say it's become sexy. If anything, it's probably the reverse of sexy. But it's recognising the maturity and changes that are going on with the organisation. I hear you, and we do this to a certain extent, but we also see where incidents, errors, whatever language you want to use, come up, and not necessarily, we haven't had the maturity to do the continuous improvement and ensure that those errors don't occur in the future.
Who hasn't had the maturity?
The organisation. It hasn't had the tools, hasn't had the resources, hasn't had a range of things to enable it to respond to these things as best you could. And you see that, and you see the changing when Bruce, you might have a better history on this. Patricia might be able to talk to it a little bit. You see that a little bit in the history around the audit plan as well, whereas 2-3 years ago there would be matters on the and some of the councillors might be able to help me here, that had sat on that audit improvement list for 4 or 5 years, where the organisation had not got to the point of being able to make those improvements and get them off the list. You're hearing from Michael, you're hearing from Patricia, and you're asking yourselves, well, we would expect them to be able to be dealt with in 12 months or 18 months, whereas historically these things sat there for quite a long time. And so it's really just reinforcing the message that should always have been there, but saying to yourselves and holding ourselves to account that we're going to start to be more proactive, more aggressive, for want of a better word, in terms of ensuring that this is the process that is occurring.
So what I hear you say is the previous leadership have failed the organisation, and so how can we be assured that the current leadership aren't making the same mistake?
Well, it's the conversations at this committee. It's the sorry.
Can I ask
Michael
Michael to maybe jump in?
Yeah, thank you through yourself, Chair. Look, it's not, and I'll probably take a little bit of exception to the failure of previous leadership. Leadership and
Well, they're not my words; they're the words that I've just heard.
Leadership's been on a journey in relation to the council. We've taken a focus over the last 3 to 4 years, so it's not just this tenure; it's previous. We've been actually with this committee as well, giving a very clear direction to focus in on our processes and policies and procedures and frameworks, which we have done over that time frame. And this is one of those that we've been working on in line with good governance from council. We're stepping up our game internally, and that's part of our internal controls as well. That's another step, but we're also making sure our frameworks are in place from governance, risk, performance. There's a number that we're working on. This is just one of the ones that we've finally got to the stage where we're now, that next step, we're actually detailing all the risks. We're actually starting to bring them up. We're assessing them. This has been an evolution from actually assessing what's the tolerance of risk from a council perspective to the next step to here's now all the risks that are fed from our long-term plan to from a governance perspective and from an internal perspective. It's our maturity has really gone through a cycle now to, I think we're actually at a position where we're close to having all the frameworks in. We now need to actually mature them. So it is a journey that the council has been on over some years. Bruce might be able to expand on that because it was actually in when the committee first started that actually was put on as a challenge to the council to actually step up in this space. When I arrived, I took on that challenge as well, and I know that like I say, it's been going for a number of years. It's not just come to fruition in the last few weeks. It's been a while.
And I suppose, there's a couple of things, right? If you'd look at page 71 of Bob Books, the previous report, there are key functions we need to do. We take public money and we make a promise to them that we're going to do these things, we're going to spend this money wisely and well, and it's going to get done and it's not going to be wasted. And there's a report further along around, the shovel-ready projects and how government ignored the advice of a lot of people and went and spent $12 billion in a scattergun approach. And I would be really just beside myself if, I don't have any control. But has that happened previous councils, and we can't do much about that. But I think what we need to do is say, right, well, this is really, really important, and this is why this committee's here, to make sure that we're not saying, we're going to mature this and we're going to continue this. We're actually going to do this, and we're going to get good at it today. And if we can't get good at it today, why not? Is it a competency thing? Or is it a lack of something else? But whatever it is, if it is one of those things that we can fix, we need to sort it out real quick because it's so fundamental to the function of what we do.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly respond to that. You can't put it into action straight away. I hear what the council is saying, but it is a maturity. I need to educate the organisation and then grow their understanding, which we have been on that journey of doing. And now we're starting to get in that position of actually exactly what council is asking, which is get to that point of delivery. And I think we're actually at that stage now and starting to actually not push this through the organisation, but make it part of the organisation. Because I think if you impose it, then it doesn't actually embed. We want it embedded for the longer term. And so we've been on that path of educating and growing the understanding. So it's not a competency thing. It's about educating and just setting the framework that this is how we operate, and that's now at the position I feel that we're ready to actually have it fed right through the organisation. So we are using this right through, and this is just an example of not example. It's actually highlighting that we're actually bringing it now to the Risk and Assurance Committee in a position where we feel that we're actually ready that perspective as an organisation.
Bruce, could you put your chair's view across that?
Thank you. I'm wanting to say everybody's correct, actually, which sounds like I'm trying to be a politician, which is not my role. I think, Grant, the key point is if you were to go back to my assessment of the committee that I gave the committee at the end of last year, this is exactly on point. The distractions that council have had prior to this current triennium have been substantial and in their own right have been of significant risk and have been dealt with through the committee. So in a sense, I'm putting a defence there about what the committee has done. But if you look at my notes on the assessment of where the committee was at going forward, I said it needed to get onto this issue of proper risk and assurance, governance and management. I don't have any trouble with your desire for the expression of urgency around it because we should be doing it. And in fact, the conversation that you have sponsored, Tom, around the council executive governance may not be adequate is actually really important because we, and I say that globally, are yet to have an effective risk discussion. And so I think this is actually really good, Andrew. Thank you for this. To me, it's really the first time I've seen what management believe are the top 10 risks. Critical question now is what do we do with this as a committee? And I think we've got a lot more work to do this to help do exactly what Michael has said, which is drive this into the organisation so it's part of our DNA. Because actually, point made, Grant, this has not been done in the past for a whole bunch of reasons, which you know are not good, but are primarily because of some of the external things which have been are well known inside I guess well known in the community about the ongoing challenges Invercargill City's had at a governance level. But we are on the right track now, and that's actually the most important thing. So I hear your point, and I would agree with you. Speed would be good. So perhaps my question, Ross, is with this good work now, Michael and Andrew, what's the pathway? I've used that word too many times. What's the next steps to get this so that we as a committee and we as representing governance are aligned? Because we've heard Tom's good questions. And actually, what is our risk appetite and what could stop us from achieving our objectives or indeed help us make better decisions?
Andrew or Michael?
Yeah, I don't know whether Michael's or who's looking at it. There's a number of things that have been put in place that will help achieve that. Part of it, as I said, Michael, and it's why I've called it out quite clearly here as a risk, is the work in our council space. You heard Michael touch on it a couple of times in his response to earlier questions. A lot of the difficulty we have is not so much that these things may or may not have been managed, but we just can't see whether or not they're being managed. And so creating a system that enables us to actually monitor in a time and cost effective manner some of these things is part of what we're talking about. You see those sort of changes, improvements come through in the health and safety report that we deal with later on. You can see where that work in that space and those conversations are starting to show fruition in terms of what we can report and the conversations that we can have with this committee around those issues. So some of it is it's the unknown that's causing us concern rather than the known. It's not that we're saying there's a failure to do these things, we just can't necessarily satisfy ourselves or you that there isn't. So improvements in that space will help. Improvements across performance more generally, clarity around some of these things will help us then bring the reporting up. The piece that we had, I think at the beginning of this training around the just culture and how we will review these things drive performance because they set expectations and drive people to behave the way we would like them to in the best interests of, to Tom's point, the best interests of the community to achieve those outcomes. So that it's getting that data collection in place, linking through some of the internal audit work into our risks. I think there's a little bit of work to be done to bring that through and show where more work needs to be done and what this committee sees in that space. They're the sort of improvements that we're just working along in the background and trying to bring up when we think we can give them to you.
Darren, did you? Oh, sorry, Michael. Answer that first.
Thank you, through yourself, Chair. I just wondered, Bruce can repeat his question, just make sure I actually answer it correctly.
Yeah, look, Michael, all I was really trying to reflect is I've absolutely enjoyed reading this paper. I mean, I think it's really good, and I'm glad to hear of the work that is being done by ELT, who are the people that can drive risk management. I think what I'm looking for is what is the next step for us as representing governance to discuss, dare I say it, adopt these as our big risks, have discussions about their clarity, risk appetite, those sorts of things, which mean that as governors, we can have assurance that we are focused on the big things that will stop us from achieving our objectives, but also can then lead a proper governance-led drive for effective risk management inside the organisation.
Yeah, thanks, through yourself, Chair. Just an answer to that Bruce, I talked about before about being on a bit of a journey in relation to the process side of it and actually getting the maturity through the organisation. I think you've highlighted it. It's also sitting at the committee level that we need to get that the understanding and the maturity through. A lot will be used to it within other sectors, but what we're trying to get for this council is actually that stepped approach in relation to build the understanding about what is acceptable risk and what's not, and then actually bring up, well, here's the risks that have come through the long-term planning process. We will actually need to come up and say, well, what are the other risks? What do you want us as an executive team also to be managing on your behalf? And that's part of this. And I will be talking to a lot of these risks in the CE update and what's happening within the organisation in relation to them. We're also busy rolling it out within the organisation to right through, so all of our management levels. So we will have a position where we are making this part of the standard agendas from that perspective. That has been an evolution and a process for us to actually get there, because what people have seen and perceived as risks before, putting the strategic level over top as well has given them a different view of risk and management. So there is a bit of an education process we've been doing in relation to that. These are step changes in an organisation, and we're probably, I would say, about 12 months in to a very big change, with 12 months probably still to go to actually start embedding it. And the key reason I say that is one of the key drivers of that was having an established ELT, and that was one of the risks in relation to governance side of it. Haven't had that until just recently. We now have an ELT that's in place on board with the program, so it's now rolling it out to the rest of the organisation, and I believe that's about a 12-month time frame based on previous experience. Rolling it through, so we're on the right path, I feel, and everyone's on that journey. So hopefully, circling back to one of the other parts of your question, is we will need to bring back these risks for validation at council, along with an assessment. Are there other risks that council want to assess?
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Darren?
Thanks, Chair. We've kind of moved on from the point I was going to make initially, but I think it's worth recognising that from a councillor perspective, it's a case of we are continuously looking at asking better questions and understanding what questions to ask, and that's a process that has gone across several councils and goes through a partial reset every time you change some of the personnel that's involved. We need to recognise that we had a 50% change in the elected representatives, and coming to terms with understanding the role of councillor, of council, because Tom's right, there are different tensions between where staff come from, which is best case scenario, worst case scenario, middle bowl of porridge, to us. Whilst we do represent the community, we come with a community perspective, and we take that into consideration along with the information that the staff have put. And it's not necessarily the community's thoughts that we end up actioning, because we've got more information than just their want. And we've had a couple of hiccups along the way through that course of improvement. Obviously, the working together was a significant part of that. The pandemic didn't help either, because that created a reset, and there was a touch on the shovel-ready projects. Nobody saw that coming. You know, that was never part of a long-term plan. It was something that councils had to respond to, councils, staff and councillors, really nimbly, and probably not going into our proposals as thoroughly as we would have with anything else, but also having had those warnings from staff. Having been here through all of the current audit processes, and the first one, which was just awful, and was quite rightly qualified, through to the recent qualifications, which, you know, I personally feel were quite unfair. There is night and day between them, and so I think what Andrew has said is that it is a case of improvement. I'm quite sure that Michael is across that and has been looking to shape things as best he can with his new ELT now that he has that in place. The challenge is always going to be who sits here, because we all come with different perspectives, and it's also right that we review our risk appetite at the start of each term, because this council is absolutely not like any of the others that have come previously. So I guess my point is, it really is always constantly a work in progress. We're getting better at it. I don't think saying that we had failed in the past is quite accurate. We certainly weren't.
I didn't say it.
Yeah, well, no, that was your praise here, what he said.
Yeah, that's right.
And that could be subjective. He says channeling is in a lawyer, which I don't have. Certainly wasn't great sometimes, but it is way better than it was. And from the paper, I get real confidence that it's going to constantly get better. I think we challenge the position now better than we ever have, and I'm really encouraged by that.
Come to Grant then, Tom, for any final comments.
Yeah, so I think looping back to Bruce's question, I think what I took out of it, I think it's a really good one, is that, you know, this document's a little bit of the what, and then what we need to solve in a governance role is the so what. And in my mind, and some of the issues that Darren's pointed out, how we help the next generation that come through is we have really strong structure around our governance process, right? So when they look at a so what, they might see a strategic intent document that's driven out of what our risks are, then what the strategic intent of the council was, and then how that plays out in the long-term plan. And if that's in place, that enables them in a governance role to quickly be brought up to speed. Well, look, this is what the last council's view of risk was. This is how they were trying to solve for that risk in terms of their strategic intent, and that's how it played out in the long-term plan, and then the plan that the staff took out. And I think that's what I take out of the question that Bruce has asked, is that's where we need to get to reasonably quickly around that process, so we avoid as much as possible, noting that we're not always going to be able to fully solve the problem, but I think we give the next, well, ourselves, but equally the next council, a much better space to land on. Okay, well, this is what the previous council thought their risks were, what they were going to do about those risks in terms of solve them. And I'll give you the example on page 5 of 7 of the report, or 83, you know, achieve financial resilience. Now, this is drum I've beaten quite a bit, and I'll continue to beat it. You know, the only way we can solve and help our community continue to afford the services, which are going to rise, is through economic development. You know, we've got to have more money in our system. People have got to be earning more to be able to meet the costs of their rates, whether they're through rents or they're through property right, that they directly own. Now, there's no other way, or if there is, I'd love to hear someone tell me how it is, other than people get paid more through economic productivity, which leads to their ability, and through that process, the system is resilient. And so that's why I think it's really important bringing it back to the strategic intent. What is this council's strategic intent around economic development? We do some funding of Great South, and they've got a key core function of what they do is economic development. And I think we've got to be really ensuring that that's what we do as a council to make sure we can solve the problems that are identified in our risk report. And I mean, that's what I hear Bruce's question is, and that's where I think we should head to as a governance group, and then that fully supports Michael and his team to be able to then deliver on that and the system's working.
Thanks, Grant. Tom?
The point I was going to make, actually, I think was pretty similar to what Darren was saying. Every improvement programme, whether it's a step improvement or whether it's continuous improvement, carries within it the implication of criticism about the previous generation. You know, why were they not smart enough to make that change? And of course, the whole point of continuous improvement is, as the word says, it's continuous, and the next generation will make changes too, and might look at us and say, why were they not smart enough to see that? And sometimes it's how you wordsmith it, how the words that you use. Nothing to do with how smart a previous generation was. It's just that, if you've got continuous improvement programs, you are always going to be changing things, hopefully for the better. Occasionally you make a mistake, but hopefully for the better. And there is no implied criticism that somebody previously was not smart enough or was not doing their job well. It's just that that's the nature of improvement.
Thanks. I would look to if there's no further comments or questions, I'll look to the recommendations and just to make sure that we're comfortable, and perhaps just before I put them, I'll just, the important thing, Andrew, I think, is the where to now and what comes back to RNA. Sorry, Rhea, did you want to?
Sorry, Ross. I wanted to ask some questions about the child protection policy. Sorry, I was waiting for the other discussion to finish. I've got quite a few questions about this policy, Andrew, and I was wondering if I could ask you and could be patient with me. I wanted to know who wrote this policy, who was this policy directed to, because it says up there that it's the Youth Council who's engaged with the Youth Council, but as a collection, including us elected members, we're also out in the community in our roles. We've gone and visited Enviro schools, many places. I'm just thinking, what numbers do we have, and have we collected numbers of how many children are in contact with council, with volunteers, with elected members I'm not saying that this policy isn't good, I'm just thinking it's not quite right yet.
So the short answer to that one is that it comes from the Youth Council as an independent body in essence. And so they have, through their governance arrangements, the ability to set their own rules. Right. And so whilst there are councillors on that Youth Council, they're on there effectively at the behest of the Youth Council. They're not there in their strict role as councillors. Council laws are not employees, no. And so council in itself cannot make rules or put requirements on councillors in this space. So what you're talking about in terms of engagements that councillors do, that is a matter that councillors have control over, and council, the entity can't say, oh, we need a child check if you're going to go and do that, because that's your democratically elected right, effectively, to go and do those things. So this is really only where effectively think of the Youth Council as a third party, like a school saying, if you want to come to my committee, you have to go through this process. It's not council, so we couldn't say to, if there was youth here, we couldn't say to councillors, you cannot come to this committee unless you have a police check around this thing, because you've got a right to attend that, irrespective of that. So that's why it's framed and coming the way it is. The policy itself is predominantly an internal policy. So we can say to our staff, when you're exposed to children, we want you to go through this process. So we can do that because they're our staff, but we can't do
Yeah,
that.
I understand that.
counsellors. Yeah.
For sure. What I was probably trying to get a better grasp on was that when I look at this, I'm not saying this isn't good policy. Clearly, there's a reason why this is needed to be put in place. That's what that alludes to for me. What I'm probably identifying is it's quite broad. I mean, in some areas in here, it looks like we are, governed to look after members of our community and to report things like neglect to a designated person. Well, who's that designated person? What qualifications do they hold? So I think there's a few gaps in here that, to me, are concerning. I think it's at stages that I myself have not been left with children as a one-on-one, but as counsellors, we have gone to events where we have been involved in recognising children all volunteering, like Kids Zone, things like that. That organisation already has things in place for you to sign. But I'm also concerned that we have potentially some counsellors that won't sign this policy.
And that's their right, I suppose.
So how fit is the policy if they choose not to sign it? Then what happens?
Well, for the youth council would be entitled to say you cannot come to our functions.
Fair enough.
So that's it's.
Darren.
Okay, I can come at this from several angles. Firstly, in my day job, I've just been through a process of introducing a child protection policy. I'm also one of the counsellors that's been allowed to attend the youth council meetings with their consent, and we need to recognise that it's from youth council that this request for a policy has come forward. I am not, because we're in an open meeting, going to go through in detail what potentially is looking to be closed, and you're just going to have to deal with that. I'm happy to have a conversation with you away from the table, but
that's fine.
In many cases, the child protection policy is there, and I don't mean just us, I mean all of them, because it's better to do something than nothing at all. Because a child protection policy where you're required to go through a police check, and I get checked so many times, there must be somebody in Wellington going, are we missing something? Is there something about this guy that we need to be aware of? Fortunately, they haven't found it yet. But what other tool do you have? And unless you've been caught, it's not going to flag anything.
No.
There are people who should not come into contact with children who have not been caught.
Absolutely.
And so it's better than nothing. As for everything outside of youth council, well, I mean, that's up to us as individuals, but this is a tool that is coming in to protect them, to answer the potential questions that could be asked by their parents of, we're sending our kids along here in good faith through all the things that you're sending them out to do. What are you doing to make sure that they're kept safe? That's why this policy is here. I didn't have a problem in signing it and sending it back in, and so far there hasn't been a flag that's come back, which is great. But I think it is important to realise that the youth council meetings are theirs, and if a council is there and they're not comfortable with the councillor, they'll have a word with the staff, and the staff will go to Michael, and Michael will come to us and go, actually, they would rather have somebody else there to converse with them.
Okay.
Tom.
I was going to make the point that I don't think this policy, and I'm just trying to find where it says otherwise, I don't think this policy only applies to the youth council, does it? It applies to any situation where Invercargill City has organised activities where children are involved, because it talks about children's workers rather than, youth workers. So I suppose I'll stop. I think that's a question, actually. It would apply to, if we organised other events where children were going to be there, and would this policy still apply?
For staff, it applies for all circumstances, and for the way we've defined worker, and I'll just go back and check to make sure I did it correctly.
It doesn't include.
Was to say that, because normally you wouldn't be a worker, So what we've said for the purposes of youth council events, you're determined to be a worker. So that's why how we've extended it to councillors for that. And we could have a separate policy just dealing with that, which one.
So just give an example. Let's suppose, and I know we don't do these things, but let's suppose council organised and managed a circus coming to town, right? And councillors were asked to provide volunteers for that. Would this policy apply to that? Because logically it should.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying from a risk perspective, and that's the thing. We do assess the risk. So you've got a number of things going on here. We assess the risks, a whole range of risks when we have events. One of the risks, obviously, is a safety with children risk. We cannot require councillors to undertake a police check to attend those things. But that does not mean that we do not take into account the risks of working with children. So all our staff have to go through the same things, and we put in place other controls. Whenever we have any event, we try and mitigate the risk of things occurring. So there's other controls put in place. This, to Councillor Ludlow's points, is just an obvious one to use where we can, but we can't use it for councillors outside of something like the Youth Council.
Yeah, I wasn't meaning it broadly, because of course councillors come into contact with children every single day, right? So, but what I was meaning was, if there was an activity which was organised by ICC, and councillors were attending that representing ICC, as they do in the case of the Youth Council, in that situation would this policy apply? And I'm asking the question really in response to what I hear Maria saying, which is, you know, maybe there isn't enough breadth in the policy. I think that was the point.
We can't stop councillors attending functions. We as council cannot say this is a council event and you cannot attend.
Okay, and the difference with the Youth Council being that it's a Youth Council event, is that what you're... Okay.
Rhea.
So, Andrew, I'm interested in your comment that you said just before, saying that maybe this needs to be separated out.
Well, you could if it's causing confusion for councillors, we could separate out and say there is a Youth Council policy that specifically applies to councillors, if that makes it easier for councillors to understand for their events.
I would feel more comfortable with that, because when I look at this, it feels like there's too many things getting into that pot, and it's overtaking the Youth Council's safety in terms of, you know, protection working with adults. We can
have a specific policy that the Youth Council has for councillors that requires, but I suppose the problem, and again we're in public so it doesn't really matter, but the one issue that causes is, why do we have a specific policy on this for councillors as opposed to everyone else who attends the Youth Council? It sort of, it looks odd, the optics.
It is, but that's
a little bit odd.
It is, but that's the nature of what we're involved in.
Contact with them.
Yeah.
There are other people outside.
So again, if that makes the concept easier,
I mean,
for
it's employed
councillors to
versus
understand,
elected, really.
If that makes the concept, there's no difficulty with doing that, but that is the issue that it raises. Why just yourselves? But that's fine if that works. There's no reason why we can't do that.
I thought that's what it was. Sorry, Andrew, my understanding is that's what it was. It was specifically in dealing with the Youth Council.
Oh, it is, but this policy deals with staff more generally across all events and broader people. So we need to have a separate policy that just applies to councillors when they're attending the Youth Council.
I think that's what's muddying this policy, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's fine. If that makes it easier, then we can. There's no reason why we can't do that.
Can I ask, if you are going to do that, what would be the difference in wording between the document we are now looking at?
Nothing.
And what you would then produce?
Nothing.
You would merely, to me, you would merely be putting a different heading on the wording that is currently here.
It wouldn't use the word worker. It would just use councillor.
Yeah. Apart from that,
yeah,
there is nothing I can see that would be a change.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So it would be a new heading and the removal of one word.
And the definition would just apply to councillors rather than to workers.
Having heard all that, I'm going to look to the resolutions, and I'm going to make sure, Andrew, you're comfortable, given the discussion, that the resolutions reflect, and then where to in reporting to R&A from here. So I think that's the important part.
So you're referring to the fourth item, Chair?
No, just in general. Just
or-
in general, I think. The one we haven't touched on, in a matter of time, I think we'll probably is best to bring it back, is the discussion that was preempted, I suppose, around the risks and whether or not that's all the risks. And 3 really tries to deal with that, particularly for the new risks that we added. But I suspect, given where we are in the meeting, it might be best to bring that back and say
I'm more
that
interested in the report and bringing back so that we are continuously improving.
Well, but also so that we can go through those risks and be satisfied that they're the ones that captures all the risks that we think council wants us to focus on, and that we've done a bit more work on those, so we can bring that back to the next meeting rather than confirm that here. Note that a risk register will be brought back to this committee for further discussion and approval around.
Perhaps we could just add 0.5 to that.
Happy either way.
If I may, I'm concerned about that risk. I talked about the number 192.
Yep.
And I would not, if it was put to the vote as it is, I would not support on the basis that I'm concerned about the wording of 192. So I think if we can, Andrew's suggestion, I think that he brings it back with some revisions, as other people have suggested other revisions. But we just need to be a little bit careful that we're not supporting the document as it stands.
So we could move points 1 and 2. And then 0.3 would be bring it back.
Or from the chair, you could just leave it laying on the table till the next meeting.
Michael, you got a preference?
Through yourself, Chair, you could amend 3 to the committee requests the risk assessment associated with identified risks for additional council risk register be brought back to the committee for confirmation.
Yeah, you just, sorry, but that was specifically referring to the new ones, so I'll just get rid of the identified risks, just the risk register.
That's additional risk. Associated with the council risk register.
That's fine. 0.4, Red, are you looking to change? I just asked for some commentary before we suggest some wording.
Changes, but the question I asked was like who wrote that, and then it was background is that it was designed. So it's not notes changes. It's the new.
I think we can take away the discussion. Yeah. That's just noting the changes. It's a policy that's approved by Michael. We'll note the discussion, because you're not approving anything there, but we'll bring back up to council a separate policy that deals with them for clarity.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, with that change,
I don't think 3 is quite right still.
Yeah.
You want to wordsmith it?
Request a further report on the risk assessment associated with the council.
Just request a further report on the council risk register and leave it like that.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, happy with that?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Leslie.
Well, that captures what we've just been talking about. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Ria. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Thank you, and thank you for that discussion. Move to financial risk update.
Okay, this is a
this sort of goes back into the past a little, and it focuses on our current compliance with our treasury policy, financial liability policy. As the committee is well aware, we have been in breach of that policy for some time in relation to having sufficient fixed or floating interest rates. In the last quarter, that policy breach has also appeared in our shorter tenure as well. We've been hoping for the markets to move a little. They're moving in the wrong direction at the moment. It's fluctuating, but we have agreed a position going forward, and that we're looking to take out some forward start swap arrangements to lower, to give that fixed position further out in the policy, and that should cover us. We're just waiting for the swap market to get to a position where we want to enter it. We are mindful that, and this is supported by Bancorp, that we do have a very low average cost of borrowing. At December, it's still one of the lowest, but we have some low interest rates going off, and as I've said in the report, at the moment our GFA's borrowing start with a 5, and some of them are starting with a 6, so it is significantly higher than where we have been in the past. The other thing of note, as we went and reviewed the policy, was we noted that during the period of stability that we've been through, we've been using 0 to 2, 2 to 5, and 5 to 10 as our maturity buckets. The fluctuations at the moment, we believe it is better to go to 0 to 2, 2 to 4, and then 4 to 10. The policy does allow me to do an annual review of those buckets, but have to bring it back through to council, so that's why we've recommended that the committee recommend through to council to change those maturity buckets. As part of it'll come through with the LTP, because this is one of the policies that come through, and that just so that we've got some alignment going through.
Thank you. Tom?
I was going to say that I think it's right that it is this committee which approves the policy. But I think equally, this is a sort of policy that is not intended to be enduring. It's intended to change as market circumstances change, and it is appropriate to, bring back recommendations as we have in this paper, when those market circumstances are different. So I support the recommendation, Chair.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, similarly to Tom's comment, just one, and because it's in public, I think it's important that we should capture page 2 of 3 or 189 board books, just what our view was as to why we're holding off from coming within our policy, and you've outlined it, but I think it's important that that's documented so public understand the view we held, and that's why we made the decision, just for transparency more than anything else. It's just an amendment really to the reporting. I think it's good for people reading the reports to know that, okay, well, why did you have that view? They may disagree or not, but at least they can understand what our view was, and I just think it's good reporting. So.
All right, with those comments, could I ask someone move, accept the report and recommendations? Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Tom. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Could I move now that we move to...
Did we jump item 8, Chair?
Sorry?
Did we jump item 8?
Oh, you may have... You were late, sorry.
My apologies.
That item is sitting on the table and will be brought back to the next meeting.
Thank you. I'm happy to move we go into public excluded for the reasons as outlined.
Thank you, Darren.
Second.
Thank you, Leslie. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We have a 5-minute smoko break. I think
they were the good old days, weren't they?
Smoko you speak of.
Smoko.
That's not a very good risk.